Lamar Jackson is back in the building for the Baltimore Ravens, but is there still reason to panic with this contract negotiations looming? That and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, Lamar's back. He wasn't when we made the thumbnail. Joke's on us. However, there's still reason for some concern, I'd say, with the fact that he's still not under contract long term with the Baltimore Ravens. So is that of concern for you in Dynasty as somebody who rosters Lamar Jackson?
No, still not a concern for me. I think it's more of a, let's say, unique case or a unique, unique case, like for us to actually see a player representing themselves and going through a long-term like contract extension, like in those negotiations that go with it. Now, would it be great if he had like a Drew Rosenhaus like in his corner, essentially taking care of all this stuff
Right,
for him, so
exactly.
he could focus on football, and then we as fantasy managers, we can just watch the same like song and dance that happens almost every year with every other quarterback. Like, look at what's going on with Kyler Murray, where he removed all of his like Arizona
Yeah.
Cardinals affiliations from social media.
Who does
You know,
have Drew Rosenhaus, actually?
yeah, but remove the social media stuff like from his this, that, and the third, and now he's back smiling and taking pictures or whatever. It's like there's some smoke to it, but it winds up never being, at least to the point where, or at least it's less likely, I say not never, but it's less likely that we see something drastic happening, like him holding out or him walking away, retiring, or getting moved to another team or whatever the case may be. The Baltimore Ravens, like this offense, is built around Lamar Jackson and his running style. And so it's easier for me to see a scenario where it essentially, sure, there's going to be like some bumps along the road. We're probably going to hear just a number of we'll probably get a few Schefter bombs or something like that, where, the team is close to a deal, but then Lamar probably say something like, we ain't close to a deal, like just like stuff like that going back and forth over social media, but nothing long term. At least there's nothing in my eyes that's makes it seem like there's going to be a long-term battle ahead. Like there's not going to be like a Kirk Cousins like type of experience where we're looking at multiple franchise tags and then him ultimately leaving the team. Even still, for the 2 to 3 years, if most folks and most dynasty managers look within that window, current situation for Lamar is as good as it's going to be. Like, we can argue over the offensive productivity of the Ravens like for 2022 because they've shipped off Marquise Brown, but for Lamar Jackson himself, I still think he's going to be one of those top 5 like dynasty assets like for 2022 and for the foreseeable future.
Sure. And do I have concern in that I wish he would sign a long-term contract with as somebody who has him as quarterback 2 in Dynasty and someone who has him on a lot of rosters? Yes, I would absolutely love to know that Drew Rosenhaus was in his corner, that he was going to get a long-term deal done soon.
Mm-hmm.
I have no reason to believe that Lamar Jackson isn't smart, and I know that he would love to make as much money as possible, especially since it doesn't seem like a lot to us because we're so used to discussing millions of dollars. Like, you just go over to Spot Track and you just like, oh, that guy's worth 7 million. That guy's going to make 8 million. Like,
Right.
looks like nothing. We're numb to it now. Could be the different, like, one decision's the difference between 50 million, $60 million. It's the difference between, even if it's the difference between 50 million a year and 52 million a year over 3 years. That's $6 million more money than I'll ever see just because Lamar Jackson did X, Y, or Z. So it's really difficult to say if he's going to end up doing a good job for himself or not. I will say that there is probably a good reason that almost literally every other player in the league has an agent and doesn't represent themselves. But I also, there's some part of me that can relate to Lamar Jackson when he got into the league, and he's sitting down with the agents, get a feel for things, and they go ahead and they slide that contract across the table, and he says, "You're getting how much? You're getting what percent? Nah, I got this. I'm good. So there's a part of that I appreciate as a normal person and understand not wanting to give that big a piece of your pie to somebody else who's just basically working off of your success. So the more you succeed, the more money they make. In theory, the more money they make you, but apparently Lamar Jackson doesn't feel that way. So then back to the football side of the situation. Very worried about this offense. Very worried is a little dramatic. Let's say reasonably worried about this offense going into 2022, because if you're willing to ship off Marquise Brown when your wide receiver core was not deep anyways, then you're just telling Lamar Jackson to go be better. Just be better. Be better than everybody else that you play against. And while Lamar Jackson could do that, and I saw him do that when I was at the game against the Colts last year when he threw for like 430 yards and 4 touchdowns, I know he can do it. Can he do it for 17 games? I don't. Why would you even want to ask him to do that? Get him some help. And, we can talk about some free agents. I would like to see Will Fuller go there, maybe Odell Beckham. Julio Jones is still out there, but he's good for, his 8 maybe games, which would be nice going in the playoffs or something to have a veteran like Julio. But if Rashad Bateman goes down, you're talking about James Prochet, Devin Duvernay being your primary 2 wide receivers. If Mark Andrews goes down, well, you just drafted a whole handful of rookie tight ends. I think they drafted 3, either 2 or 3 tight ends in this last draft. So, I mean, you're not set up for depth, and you would think the team that had some 20-some IR players last year would go into this season with depth. It's almost like they feel like they got all their injuries out of the way last year, and that's just sorry, Jim Harbaugh. That's not how statistics works, my buddy. They're still just as likely to get injured this year as they were last year. So it'd be nice if you had a little bit extra at wide receiver. I don't know. Do you think that Lamar Jackson just goes out and produces the way he did 2 years ago because of all that rushing?
Yeah, I think so. Because just the way that the Ravens offense has been built around Lamar, it doesn't feature the wide receiver position. That's literally what Marquise Brown left because of the fact that even though the targets are there, it's not like a Devo wide receiver type thing that they're not targeting me enough. No, it's not that. It's about how the wide receiver position is actually used there in Baltimore
and how it's going to get paid there.
Oh, that's also true as well. But he's not the only wide receiver that said that. Des Bryant, when he was there for a hot minute, also said the exact same thing. So I completely understand, and I agree with your take that it would be nice if they had more depth at the position. Going into the year with Bateman, Duvernay, and Prochet as your starting 3 wide receivers is probably not the best recipe for success. I can get if you want to. I mean, of course, if you have a guy like Mark Andrews as your starting tight end, sure. We can't just say that their pass catching core stinks, because we have to at least look at, or at least incorporate, Andrews into that analysis. But still, it'd be really nice if they had a bit more depth versus just the number of. I mean, if you look at their page over on our lads, I mean, they have 9, 10, 12 receivers on their roster, but all of them are UDFAs and guys that they that they've essentially just picked up.
Miles Boykin.
Right, but Miles Boykin, let's see, Mekhi Polk, Devin Williams, Slade Bolden.
Nope.
I mean, just a number of guys. It's so they've got depth.
I never heard of them.
Young depth, right? And it's just in undeveloped depth. And we don't know if they're going to be on the team even once the 2022 season starts, let alone 23 and beyond. So yes, I 100% agree that it would be nice if they added a Will Fuller or a Julio Jones or something to continue to make defenses shift their attention away from the running game.
Even care at all.
Right. And
make
just
them even care a little.
So that's where I can understand why they're building their team this way, because it really is a bet on Lamar being better. But at the same time, it's all right, I get that you want to tactically use Devin Duvernay as a deep threat to pull some of the attention away from the intermediate parts of the field, to let a guy like Rashad Bateman, to let a guy like Mark Andrews work in the intermediate sections of the field where they do their most damage. I get that. And also to help open up the running game as well, in a similar way that the Green Bay Packers had used MVS for year in and year out, which is actually when MVS was injured, I have a sneaking suspicion that's why they wound up losing that playoff game just this past year, because MVS was out. And there's only so much you can do if your offense is predicated on trying to beat Devontae Adams, beat teams over the head with Devontae Adams from the slot so often, and Allen Lazard out of the slot so often. It's you need guys that can pull defenses away. So I get on paper why they would want to do it, but like you said, one injury, just that whole tower of cards tumbles at that point. So I think short term, I mean, I get that they're trying to take a long-term view, but the short term is just that does make it for at least I don't know. It's a high hurdle to leap over in order to say that for 2022 on its own, this is going to be a fantasy friendly or fantasy productive offense outside of Lamar and maybe J.K. Dobbins and of course like Mark Andrews and like in Rashad Bateman, like those four pieces, sure. But outside of that, if we're hunting for, as dynasty managers, you should be hunting for guys that you would want on the back end of your roster, because that's how you churn and try and like pick up some of that youth, that guys that can turn into, let's say, reliable players like in the future. I don't see any of that here. Like, again, outside of the guys that I mentioned, I mean, sure, you might already have Devin Duvernay at the back end of your roster. Right. You might have Prochet at the back end of your roster. And shoot, he's probably on waivers for some folks as well. But are you happy about it? It's just like right. Okay, we'll see what happens. But none of the other guys that I mentioned, like Bolden, Polk, I mean, any of those other guys that are currently on the rip, nobody cares about them at this point. Right. And we don't even know if they're going to be a factor in 2023. So I think that's a fair concern, like for the Baltimore Ravens. And I think it's going to be one that's, we're just going to have to watch and see how it unfolds, because from a team building process, it makes sense for Baltimore to do it this way. But for fantasy managers, it's just going to be frustrating as all get out to try and see who outside of the key pieces we're going to want to like see connected to a top 5 like dynasty quarterback for 23 and beyond.
And that's the crazy thing. Some of those guys that we've never heard of are going to play meaningful football for the Ravens the way the roster's set up right now. That is just absolutely insane for me, for an organization who is top-notch, one of the best in the league, year in and year out. They miss on some picks, as people do. Look, they took Hayden Hurst over Lamar, but they still got Lamar, so they're a fantastic organization, and this just – I don't know how it's going to work out when you just asked Lamar Jackson to be better. And look, 2 years ago, Lamar Jackson was just the best player on the field 100% of the time. Last year, that got harder. Now, he did have COVID. He did get injured a little bit. So it's really hard to take much away from last year. But, I mean, you cannot ask him to throw for 430 yards a game and still get like 80 on the ground. And as a matter of fact, that Colts game was the game that they were going to tie the record for most games consecutively with 100 yards, and they did not get it. So when he did have to throw for 430 yards, he did not. That team collectively did not get their 100 yards rushing. But what this says for me is, like, if Rashad Bateman goes down, why would you ever see less than 9 in the box? For what? I mean, maybe consistently 8, but they're going to see the highest rate of 8-man boxes across the league next year. And it hasn't moved Lamar down my ranks because he's that good, but it doesn't mean it's a good situation. It doesn't mean that they should. One of the craziest things is that they didn't add Jarvis Landry. I thought that was a perfect fit, match made in heaven, exactly what they needed. They needed a reliable player on 3rd and 5. Because Rashad Bateman was that guy last year, but now he needs to expand into, he needs to have a higher ADOT. He needs to get downfield. He needs to run more of those posts. I mean, I guess good luck getting Rashad Bateman running some 9s, but he's going to have to do that. He's going to have to do everything. So Jarvis Landry would have been great, but now you're going to have Devin Duvernay doing what Jarvis Landry could have done for you. And it's like, that's going to be a very tall ask. I'm not moving any of these players down. Lamar Jackson's still my QB2, so that's a testament to just how incredible Lamar Jackson is. But I'm interested to see what they do between now and the beginning of the season, because this just looks scary to me.
It's just like we've been saying, it's just the lack of depth that's the problem for them, and we're just gonna have to see like if any of the bets that they've made at these receivers, like these young, like underdeveloped or undeveloped receivers, actually wind up paying off for them at some point. Because think about, like, for almost literally every other wide receiver attached to a top 5 dynasty quarterback at this point, they're most likely not on waivers at this point. Think about any of the Bills receivers. Like we don't have, like, everybody's got Isaiah McKenzie on the roster.
Byron Pringle was rostered.
Pringle was on there, like attached
Robinson,
to Mahomes. Yeah, like all of those guys, like even Jalen Guyton, Josh Palmer, that attached to Justin Herbert, like all of those guys, like we've rushed to pick up off of waivers, but ain't nobody
Yeah,
rostering
true.
the wide receiver 3 or 4 like in Baltimore at this point. Like we don't have any, like we don't have that option yet. And maybe that's something that they're trying to build towards, but we don't know who that is yet. And we're gonna just have to wait and find out. Like think about how long we were sitting on Demarcus Robinson, like on, sitting there
That's
on
what
the
I'm
back end of
saying.
our
Yeah, I
rosters.
mean,
It's just like because we knew, because he was attached to Patrick Mahomes, that he'll be valuable at some point. At least that's what I kept telling myself when I had him on my rosters. But it's just we don't have that for Lamar yet. We've not seen that level of development yet, and hopefully we get there though.
so Lamar Jackson's probably going to get run into the ground. Let's talk about another player that we wished was getting run into the ground, but it appears his workload is going to be dialed back just a bit. Najee Harris came out and said that his workload is going to be lessened this year. The problem is I don't buy it because they didn't add a running back, and they're not going to give it over to Anthony McFarland or Benny Snell. So I don't know. Are you going to take it down from, I think he was like 98%, something ridiculous, something historic last year. I wish I would have gotten the number, but his snap share was absolutely insane. So if he goes down from like 90 something to 78, okay, fine. You're still a workhorse in the league, and there aren't many workhorses left. So are you concerned at all with Najee Harris's statements?
No, not really, because like you mentioned, the talent behind him is not conducive to I guess a significant change in his role.
Right,
And does he
right,
need to be on the field for every single snap? No, especially not to be fantasy productive. We just need him in there for the touches that matter. So
right,
the touches that matter would be the ones that are going to be in the red zone or within the 20, within the 10. Is he still going to be getting targets? Like those are the things that
right,
I'm most like. Is he going to be in there on passing downs? Is he going to be down there like in the 2-minute drill? Like, so those are the areas or phases of the game or phases of the game that matter to fantasy football, like for running backs. And so if he's missing, let's say, I don't know, if he's not on the field for 2nd and 8, but he's there for 3rd and 3, like,
and catches the
or
ball, yeah.
and catches the ball and like runs for a little bit, or if he misses those, those plays that are at the like towards the end of the game when they're getting blown out or whatever, but he was already there like when they were down on the goal line or whatever, I don't care.
Yeah,
So it's really about like if that's the way that his workload is going to be scaled back, cool, good. That means he's going to be more durable or more
yeah,
effective on the carries
healthy.
that actually do matter. So yeah, I have no issue with that. I'd say to your point from earlier, it doesn't necessarily make Benny Snell or Anthony McFarland more valuable.
Right,
Like I don't think it changes anything about how I'm viewing either of those two guys, because we've seen like how, let's say, less productive or less effective they are on the field. So it's not like I'm now going to pencil in Anthony McFarland for 5 to 6 touchdowns or anything like that. Like I don't see that happening at all. It's just more
right.
of a we'll bring him out there, make sure Harris like stays fresh in the areas or in the times or areas of the field where we need him the most, and that's exactly what you want from your RB1 anyway.
Sure, if they added like a Rashad White or an Isaiah Spiller in the draft, then maybe
Then
there'd
I'd
be
be
a little bit
concerned.
more to
Yeah.
this, because then if he goes to a 65-35 split, then it takes you, in my mind, 70% and higher is still workhorse in this league.
Yeah.
It used to be 90% plus you had needed to be a workhorse, but that's just not viable anymore unless you're Najee Harris last year. So now I'm considering more like 70% and higher is still a workhorse in this league, and I cannot see him getting less than 70% when you're talking about Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland behind him. So really no concern at all. And it, like you said, if it makes them a little bit more durable, that's great too. And we've seen 10 plus catch upside with Najee Harris. So as long as he's still getting those, totally fine with that too. So the concern, and he's not even the first running back to say that this offseason. In fact, Austin Eckler came out in favor of drafting himself and said, I'll be playing less, so draft me.
Yep.
It's like, wait a second. And then you remember you're in the year 2022, and it's like, we're smart about touches now, or at least we want teams to start being smart about touches.
Yeah.
And we want Austin Eckler to be catching 10 balls and scoring touchdowns. That's what, and not getting injured. So he's smart enough, and he's on Austin Eckler's on a smart organization who's probably had these internal conversations with Brandon Staley to say, you're a superstar, we want to use you less. If you said that
Yeah.
20 years ago, you'd be like, you're out of your mind. But now that's what you have to do. Use your superstars less, use them sparingly, use them correctly. If that's what's going to happen with Najee Harris, that's fantastic to me. I don't see any reason to adjust any ranks based on the statements, even if they're true.
Not at all. If anything, we should just be more concerned with how the Pittsburgh Steelers offense is going to be, like whether it's Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky. I mean, that should be our greatest concern at this point, is how the passing offense is going to be, or how effective or efficient that's going to be. Now, I don't care about what Harris is like, what his workload is going to be, for the reasons we both outlined.
Sure. Before we get to our next wide receiver, I just want to remind everybody that we are going to be on our own channel on all of the podcast apps. If you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be the same thing. You'll come in, please subscribe, rate, review, watch to the end, because it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. But if you're used to seeing us on the Audible channel, you are now going to see all the individual Football Guys shows on their own channel. So please make sure you check those out, subscribe to those, rate, review those. But you will be seeing us on our own channels going forward rather than the Audible feed. That's going to bring us into Robbie Anderson, who has said, I'm thinking about retiring. Now, this was just a tweet, and this is just took off because it is June. There's not much to talk about. He could have just been having a bad day on his couch, or maybe he was just bored. But he did tweet something like, man, I'm thinking about retiring. It's like, okay, I've had that day like 10 times this year. So what does that really mean? However, Robbie Anderson maybe not even justifiably has lost an incredible amount of dynasty value. What does this do now? I mean, do you just go buy him because you're spending like less than a third now?
I don't know. Like, you can. I mean, it depends on where your roster's at. I know that we say that about everything, but if you think that you have a contender and you're looking for a cheap wide receiver too, Robbie Anderson fits right in.
He's gonna have startable games, man. I really think he will.
Yeah, I think so too, because I'm yet to hear anything about Terrace Marshall. He hasn't been lighting anything up at this point, and not to say that that means that he's bad or anything like that, but it's just how many pass catching options are we expecting Sam Darnold to support? Let's be realistic here. Yeah, let's be realistic. You know, Christian McCaffrey's going to get his, DJ Moore is going to get his, and then let's go ahead and pencil in Robbie Anderson for that third slot. I don't want to invest like anything more like from my dynasty rosters into the Carolina offense. Like, we're not looking at any of the tight ends. And basically that stops with Robbie Anderson. Like, he'd be the only other guy that I'd consider, because we've seen him do it before. At least whatever connection that he has with Sam Darnold, good or bad, has at least been productive for Robbie Anderson in the past as well. So I get it. And honestly, at this point, I can understand like why he would feel that way, because what more does he have to prove at this point? It's not like he's ring chasing, because the Panthers, they're in no way, shape, or form going to be in contention like for the NFC South this year. So unless he's getting moved to another team, I mean, this is his career at this point. He's been a part of like 2 bad franchises, and that's just bad luck for him. So I get it. I mean, it doesn't really seem like the Panthers are going anywhere either, at least going anywhere fast. So it makes sense. I get it. But yeah, I agree with the sentiment that if you do want to capitalize on this news and you just think that he's just having a down day and he was just tweeting out his thoughts or whatever, is in his feelings for a moment, okay, fine. And if your roster is in a spot where you think you might have a decent shot at contending this year and you want a cheap wide receiver too, okay, fine. But past that, sure, there probably are a number of scared dynasty managers that would want to try and offload him as soon as possible. So if you think you're in a spot to actually take on that type of asset, go ahead. I have no problems with it.
Imagine only being on 2 terrible teams and you had to deal with the same quarterback in both locations. My goodness, I feel for him. He's a very talented wide receiver, far surpassed expectations thus far in his career, and I still think he's got a juice in him. I'd like to think that the offense is going to get a little bit better. I can't say that I am holding my breath with Ben McAdoo there, but you would like to think they could do better than last year. And I just feel like Robbie Anderson's going to win someone the Millie at 3.7K this year. Like,
probably,
he's gonna be super cheap in DFS. He's already super cheap in best ball. I was getting Robbie Anderson in every draft in like the 16th, 15th round. Now he's probably going to be like an 18th rounder. And you're going to get Robbie Anderson around the same time that you're taking like Velus Jones. Like, give me Robbie Anderson. Same time as taking any ancillary Chiefs wide receiver, you'll be able to get Robbie Anderson. So I don't buy the tweet. I highly doubt that he's retiring, because at the end of the day, he's still going to collect a paycheck. It's just unfortunate he's going to be on a terrible team.
Yeah.
I don't mind it if it gives us a little bit of value. I don't think that the tweet was super realistic. That leaves us to one more wide receiver to discuss, and we actually just discussed him, I believe, last week for the complete opposite reason. So it was reported, I believe, 2 weeks ago that Terry McLaurin was very close to signing a deal with the Washington Commanders, and we discussed how we don't necessarily know that that's a good thing. Usually you want your players to sign long-term deals, a la Lamar Jackson earlier in the show. But Terry McLaurin signing with the Commanders might not have been the best thing for his dynasty value. Now it is being reported, another reputable source, might I add, that Terry McLaurin is not close, nowhere near close, on a deal with the Washington Commanders. Now, do we rejoice? And hopefully he hits the market. I'd say yes. What do you think about Terry McLaurin not being close with the Washington Commanders?
Oh, I mean, if the way that the rest of the franchise is being run, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. That
Give them anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, but I can see him wanting to take a step back and make sure, because the Commanders do have time in order to work this out. And I mean, they still have at least a month to 6 weeks, like before training camp starts. So it's not, to me, it's almost like the same thing that we were talking about with Lamar Jackson. And when we were referencing Kyler Murray, like him going through all the, removing stuff from social media, blah, blah, blah. Same thing here. And it's not like, again, is there any discussion about Terry McLaurin getting traded at this point? No. Is he going to wind up walking away and holding out? We haven't heard that yet. But it's just, again, the similar song and dance where the expectation would be that a deal winds up getting done. He's there with the Commanders for with a long-term deal. Yeah, but I guess the question is, for a lot of folks, do we think that his play or his production so far is commensurate with the deals that he's looking at? Like after seeing Tyreek get his bag, Devontae get his bag, like all the other deals that have gone on so far, even like Hunter Renfrow just this past week, also getting paid as well. Cooper Kupp also.
Christian Kirk even.
Christian Kirk. Now, I don't know if he's going to get Christian Kirk money. That was a little bit, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they were a little bit extra.
He might. He's going to need to get, they're going to have to pay him something ridiculous to get him to stay, just like the Jaguars had to do.
But I think it was smart on McLaurin's part to take a stance and say that, I'm going to take a step back, let things play out as they should. I mean, but again, it's just more of the same formalities, let's say, that these NFL players wind up doing in order to, as we see like deals get done, they take a step back, or I'm not going to go to this camp, or not going to do this.
Why would you?
Done. Everybody's back. Everybody's happy.
Yeah. I mean, why would you? I'm not going to go risk my body if I don't have long-term money either. That just seems like a silly proposition to me. I guess the thing with Terry McLaurin, though, another Drew Rosenhaus representative, right? He's the one who has Debo, DK, AJ Brown, and Terry.
Marquise, I thought.
Yes, I think Marquise Brown too. So that is Drew Rosenhaus, right? So
if not him, but they all have the same agent, like AJ Brown, like all those guys. I think
right. They're all sharing the same agent. So, anyways, it's probably going to get done. But the thing about Terry McLaurin is that I almost don't want it to get done. There's no reason to believe that the Washington Commanders are going to figure out the quarterback position. They haven't figured it out in the last 10 years. I mean, they accidentally figured it out for a short period of time with Kirk Cousins, who they took in the 4th round after drafting the future of their franchise and Robert Griffin III. So I guess they lucked into figuring it out for a short period of time, and then they botched that. Franchise tagged him twice, paid him a ton of money, and then he went to the Vikings and got the first guaranteed contract. And now they're going to do the same thing with Terry McLaurin. They're probably going to franchise tag him. They're not going to get anything done. And unfortunately, Terry McLaurin's going to have to play longer for an organization that's never going to figure it out. So I'd almost like it to be a clean break, maybe a trade for Terry McLaurin's value. The non-fantasy related thing that's really unfortunate is that Terry McLaurin could have earned himself so much more money if he played with any competent quarterback. Really, he's just that talented.
Yeah.
I mean, the talent is evident, so maybe he still gets a big payday, but he's not going to get top of the market money because he hasn't been able to produce consistently with solid quarterback play. He's been very good every year, but I feel like he could be great. And he's probably going to end up he's probably not considered in a lot of NFL circles that much better than Christian Kirk, which is really unfortunate because he's way more talented than Christian Kirk. So he's probably going to get Christian Kirk money, and hopefully it's with another team. We'll see how it plays out, but for now, he's not threatening a holdout or anything like that. So that's what we're really watching. That's what we're really concerned about.
Yeah, that's really all I care about at this point. And the expectation would be, because at this point in June, I don't think he's going to get moved. I mean, worst case scenario, sure, he gets tagged. Okay, fine. I mean, the Bucks have done this, 2 years in a row with Chris Godwin?
Well, they tagged him. Yeah, they technically tagged him twice, but gave him a contract the second year.
Right. So, I mean, it's worked out in the past, like for wide receivers, like of that caliber. So I can see it working out in that fashion. Now, is that the best for the player? No. Is that good for fantasy purposes and for dynasty purposes? Yes. That can wind up working out. Like if you want that player to still be in the same situation, because if he were to get moved at this point, now you're talking about new offense, different scheme, possibly different quarterback at like in the middle of June in order to get ready for the 2022 season.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, best case scenario, he stays there, gets tagged, at least for fantasy purposes, stays there, gets tagged, and then allowed to like play out the 2022 season. And hopefully a long-term deal happens afterwards. Complete continuity, no problems. But hopefully, I mean, that's, again, worst case scenario, or best case scenario, rather. Worst case scenario, he winds up getting traded. But again, if that's not in the cards at this point, for dynasty purposes, we should be able to proceed without any sort of concern that something, life-changing or seismic like winds up happening between now and August.
Sure. So we're sitting here in June. There's not a ton of news for us. It's going to be another short show this week. They'll get longer as we get closer to the season, as we start getting more news about these camps and probably players who aren't at camp. But for now, thank you so much for coming out and joining us on the Dynasty Newsletter. Please make sure you subscribe to the email list so that you get that wonderful news from Joe Bryant, Sigmund Bloom, Cecil Lammy. But for Chris and I, that's going to do it for today, and we will catch y'all next week.
Peace.